Hello again, here today with the last of the Tier 10 Carrier trio in the USS Midway. We're on the map Shards and the mode is Domination. We are against another Midway, which should be interesting. Sorry about that. Just tabbed out to adjust the volume. And lineup-wise, we're looking at a line: Musashi, Massachusetts; Bismarck, Vladivostok, Minotaur, Hindenburg, Smolensk, Alaska. Hakuryu Z23, double duty game. Only real threats are Smolensk if he's running Def AA and Minotaur. Just gonna start off with the Bearcats and get some scouting done. Now the Bearcats have not changed, but just to reiterate for anyone who might be new, since we're doing a bit of a rerun through, it's a 3x3 setup. So full squadron of 9, attack fight of 3, using the F8F Bearcat, a rather swift American attack aircraft. It fires the TinyTim rockets, which do 5400 HE alpha, with 68mm of penetration, very, very high anti-armor pen, with 34% fire chance. Now diving into the Smolensk here at the beginning of the match, probably not something you want to do under most circumstances, but I'm here anyway, so... Oh, with a Minotaur as well. Probably not how you want to start your day, but you do what you gotta do. As I get some ping spikes and my squadron disintegrates. Did get some information on both the Hakuryu and the Z23, however, as I do get detected on this rather small map. Gonna see if I can get my carrier to reverse. But yeah, we hit the Smolensk for 4,000, but the TinyTim is mainly an anti-armor. Are they really shooting me? They're really shooting me. Well, you can see my armored deck resisting most of those shells. But anyway, the anti-heavy targets rockets of the TinyTims are not ideal for shooting thin targets like the Smolensk, but they get the job done in most circumstances. Hunting for the Hakuryu here, who has beached himself without smoking. Probably want to just smoke in the future, my friend, but if you want to just sit there and give me a nice clear shot, not a perfect lineup, and I'm gonna have to fly over the Massachusetts. Triple straddle means triple defended ribbon, but no damage. But this time around, as I bring the nerfed HE dive bombers into play, oh, we get a nice lineup here. 3 hits, registering 10,000. Fighter did lock me, so I'm gonna try and escape into altitude. Unfortunately, Flak does ping that down. That's quite alright. So we know Minotaur on a mini-map, Smolensk over here, so we were using the HE bombs there. As you saw, the HE dive bombs can be quite potent, especially against destroyers that just kind of sit there and take it. But they have lost some potency compared to earlier patches such as 8.6 or 8... or not even 8.6, like 8.4 I suppose is when they're at their peak strength. Where, as you saw there, the ellipse is nice, long, and elliptical. It allows the bombs to deal heavy damage still when they hit, but they do get kind of inconsistent. Before, on a Hakuryu-sized target, you could quite easily guarantee you land most of your bombs. Now that's no longer quite as possible. Now here I'm launching the torpedo bombers. Again, a 3x3 setup. This time launching 3 Midway torpedoes. Probably my least favorite torpedo bomber in the game. Oh, so Vladi's here. Not sure if I'm gonna have the space to hit him here. Now I do have relatively short arm time or arm distance on American torpedoes, but as you can see here, relatively short isn't gonna cut it. He is gonna trim 3 of my bombers here, as I fail to hit him on the first pass. That's quite alright. Now my problem with the Midway torpedo bomber is that it has very long lineup time, and also a very wide reticle. So you can see here, it's 6 torpedoes that take a long time to kind of tighten up their dispersion, and even at max, they don't get very tight at all, and so they get a long spread. But the real problem is, of course, as I'm going to follow up on the Vladivostok with the HE dive bombers, 2 hits, 1 flood, that each torpedo does a very low amount of damage. There I only hit him with 2 torpedoes, but you saw my damage jumped from 14,000 to 21,000, which is Not that impressive, because that means each torpedo hit him for about 3,000, which is frankly pathetic for a high-tier torpedo. Now, Vladivostok is alone amongst a whole bunch of my ships, so I'm anticipating he's going to drop, but I'm going to go at him anyway, because the Vladivostok can be surprisingly durable. Now, the high explosive dive bombers I didn't get to talk about earlier, but each plane carries 2, so in attack waves of 3 you get 4 attack waves. Each plane drops 2 bombs. Oh, okay. He did die. So each plane drops 2 bombs, and more importantly, it has a 67mm of penetration with a 69% fire chance. Ooh, this Hindenburg is throwing up quite a bit of flak. Now, I did mention they got some nerfs, so first of all they have the ellipses nerf. This ellipses used to be quite a bit smaller, and the planes used to drop bombs from quite a lower height, which allowed you to hit more bombs. But secondly, they also got an HP nerf, which means they're quite frail. I'm gonna use the last of my 5 bombers here, gonna trim down to 3 before I can even touch him more than likely, which is gonna reactivate my last gasp. He's maneuvering hard, so it's gonna be quite difficult, so I'm gonna lead him there. Do get 1 bomb hit, but unfortunately no fire. While the Hindenburg is still, oh, sorry about that frame stutter. While the Hindenburg is still separated from the pack, I'm gonna swoop in with my rocket planes, the Bearcats. Now, as I mentioned before, Bearcats are best against heavy to medium armor targets. Oh, we don't have a cap still, it's concerning. Don't want to get too close. But the Hindenburg is a fairly meaty cruiser, so hopefully we can get our rockets to land. Now, each Bearcat carries 3 rockets, which means in an attack wave, you launch 9 rockets. That's not that many if you remember compared to the Audacious, which launches 42. That is significantly less. And so as a result, the munitions density is fairly low. They do close at a good speed, so even in spite of that thick flak that this Massachusetts and Hindenburg is going to throw up, I still can close the distance quite readily. He damage controls my first fire, hit him with 5 rockets for about 6,000. Close at him 3 kilometers. Pretty good reticle here. And I do score what should be a lethal fire, and he burns out. Massachusetts alone, Harugumo I don't know where he went, but I'm going to continue to pick off targets at my leisure. My team did manage to fight over A and secure it, so I'm going to continue to attack targets of opportunity. This pack here I'm avoiding at all costs. Can I get my carrier to turn itself around? Well, might as well do it now in case things get dicey. My team has identified the Massachusetts as a target of opportunity, and I agree. Now, the Massachusetts does have a rather large torpedo bulge, but it is nevertheless a tier 8, and it is alone, which means it should be the easiest to pick off. Torpedo bomber squadron fairly healthy. This time I'm going to arm it from a fair distance away. Unlike Japanese carriers, you'll note, my torpedo bombs are not particularly stealthy. So you can see if I arm outside of AA, the reticle tightens quite a lot. I can get it to even converge a little bit, but still a relatively unimpressive reticle as I pop my engine boost cooling consumable. The torpedoes are also slow, and as I mentioned earlier, they don't hit very hard. Sorry, I'm going to try and swing these planes around as I pull this up, and Musashi dispatches this guy before I can even demonstrate anything. That's alright, we'll attack another heavy torpedo defense target, in this case the Musashi. Now the Musashi doesn't have very much AA. It's a tier 9 battleship with equivalent AA to about a Fuso. But yeah, as I mentioned here, each torpedo only hits for 4200 torpedo alpha. I found the Harugumo, so I'll go deal with him after, with my TinyTims probably. I'm gonna lead the Musashi as I light up Harugumo. You're gonna see all 6 torpedoes connect, and my damage jumped for a very, very small amount. Just gonna launch my torpedoes here to inconvenience the Harugumo. My planes die. Just watching my torpedoes, see if they might hit him. Looks like he should dodge it. That's fine. At this point, I'm going to deal with this Lion. He's beside an Alaska. My teammates should finish off the Musashi. It's not like I crippled him with that 6 torpedo strike. I dealt, what was it, looked like 16,000, 18,000, which sounds good, but you have to realize that's 6 torpedoes hitting. And with that wide reticle, you don't always hit 16 torpedoes. I'm gonna try and squeeze onto this line before he slips into that smoke screen. No dice there. Let's see if he fires. If he doesn't fire, then I'll just hit this Alaska. The Alaska's a fairly good AA cruiser, but I'm a Midway. So even over this combined AA, not too concerned. Here you can see the Alaska's nice and large, and thus I can get a nice 14,000 bomb strike like that. Unlike on the earlier Harugumo, slipping into the Smolensk's AA aura, but he doesn't appear to be popping or using defensive fire. So as a result, you can see my planes remain fairly tanky. I got a fire on the Alaska on that last pass, so hopefully with these 4 bombs that I'm about to release, I can score a follow-up fire, and I do indeed, along with 10,000 HE Alpha. My reserves are slipping a bit low, you'll note, but the massive initial reserve of 20 high explosive dive bombers means that even though you lose them at a fairly good pace if you use them, you can hold on to them fairly well. Lots of torpedo bombers left. I've only been using them against relatively low AA targets, so many of them have been making it back to my home carrier. Fire continues to tick on the Alaska, and this should be a fairly tame game. My team has the enemy fairly contained, or you could argue they may have contained themselves as I continue to circle around this rock. Not a great angle to hit the Alaska, but should be a decent angle to hit the line. Coming in on his side, aiming just ahead of his nose, arming the drop at 7 kilometers. Hopefully he's going to turn in, so I'm going to arm these out here in anticipation of him turning into them. Not going to be able to hit him again, but I can chase torp this Alaska. Now I'm going to arm well inside, hit the line with 4 torpedoes. I'm going to arm well inside his AA range, so notice how slowly this is actually tightening. Now just aim here. He's probably going to dodge them, but that's quite alright. Only 5 HE dive bombers left, but I can follow up onto the Lion now. I did not flood him with any of the torpedoes, but as I mentioned, my 68mm penetration TinyTim rockets will easily defeat his armor. The Alaska is the ideal target here, so I'm probably going to make a pass on the line and then pass through and hit the Smolensk with what remains of the squadron. Still have a bit of engine boost left. I am heading towards the line, but I'm not overly concerned about that. Arming the drop out at 3 kilometers. Rocket planes have a fairly short arming distance. Hit him with 4 rockets, start a fire. I'm gonna pop my engine cooling consumable to make sure we minimize our time inside the overlapping AA aura. Launching a spread of rockets at the Alaska, and gonna recall here at this point. Detected on my hull by the Lion, but that's alright. I'm fairly durable, I'm a Midway, and he has bigger concerns than me. He is firing high explosive at me. The Lion and Conqueror are one of the few ships that can actually penetrate my deck. I have I always forget this number, I believe it's 87mm uniform armored flight deck. However, with their quarter pen and 419mm rifles, the Conqueror and Lion are able to pen through my otherwise absurdly thick armor. Gonna travel through, pop engine cooling consumable, and hit this Alaska, who's reversing into the cap. Six torpedoes hit the Lion. He shoots me again. That's fine. He's reversing here. Gonna follow up with rockets as I escape from the Alaska. My torpedoes are in the water. Let's see if I led properly. 1, 2, 3, 4 hits and a flooding is excellent. He's still flooding. I'm gonna just move towards the cap now. I pop a fighter, but it's not really for anything, just in case the Midway has any aspirations of hitting me, but as I will go through later in the port, Midway using HE dive bombers against another Midway is usually a recipe for disaster. So he did repair my flooding. There is a fighter dropped by the Midway, you'll note, but I'm just here for a fire. Or in this case, HE Alpha. Get my HE Alpha that I'm looking for. Fighter does tag me, but that's quite fine. Fighter obliterates my squadron, but that's okay. Midway's over here. Reserves say I should use my torpedo bombers. Now we've quickly accumulated quite a bit of damage. Note that the Midway's over there. None of my teammates should shoot him, though they should instead focus on these two cruisers down there. The enemy Midway is harassing this Yamato as he moves, or this Vanguard, sorry, as he moves towards me. This squadron does dissipate, but since I'm headed over to the Smolensk Minotaur cluster anyway, I will attempt to protect him from any follow-up strikes with a fighter squadron. Minotaur gets evaporated. I'm gonna use these torpedo bombers as I get a bit of ping, which will hopefully dissipate. Thank you. So torpedo bombers are actually the best anti-carrier armament. However, in this case, I'm gonna expend them on this Smolensk. I can't see him, and he can see me thanks to the air spotting range of the Midway torpedo bomber. But I can kind of guesstimate where he is. I am launching 6 torpedoes in this range at this stage. No longer air spotted, and I can see him shooting, so I can guess where he is. My fighter squadron did intercept some of those enemy torpedo bombers that the Midway sent out. Torpedoes into the smoke. Let's see. 2 hits over there, none over there, so he's over here. Don't want to arm out too far out. You see how wide they're spreading? This is part of why Midway torpedo bombers are absolutely garbage. I'm gonna chase the Smolensk with what remains of my torpedo bombers, but here I'm really just here to spot him. Note that the AA does produce a lot of flak thanks to the Grozovoy AA characteristics. Gonna chase him. Not gonna waste my time looking at him though, as my carrier starts squeaking towards the cap. My Smolensk does kill someone else. This time I have no boost charges left, so I'm going to be fairly conservative. And I'm going to hide my carrier in this channel because that is the hardest angle to hit enemy carrier from. Alright, so Smolensk dies, so now there's no targets left. But the carrier, I'm going to start by pre-dropping a rocket squadron then, because they're worthless. Bit of ping there. Now I have to be very careful with where I hit the Midway, because the armored deck will resist 68mm rockets. As I mentioned, it's something like 87mm of armor. So I need the rockets to slam into the less armored side in order to inflict damage. So 5 penetrate for 7,000. Not bad. I'm gonna use these torpedo bombers. Next, he's launching HE dive bombers, so if he attacks me, as I'm anticipating he might, I will get to demonstrate how they're fairly resistant. Nope, he went after someone else. Good for you. As he trims my bombers with an escort fighter. Well, I have no choice but to use the HE dive bombers, so I guess I'll get to show this off. So I need to hit a very specific spot on him, the conning tower. And this is because the armored deck is thicker than 67mm, which means bombs that hit anywhere else will just shatter. So that this island here on the side is the only thing I can actually penetrate on his deck. Anything else will shatter. So you saw there 3 shatters and 2 hit the conning tower to deal some amount of damage. Score a Confederate. Pretty good demo game. Ooh. Now notice I'm so close I can't actually arm the rocket planes very well. Again, rockets don't penetrate the deck either, so I have to hit either the conning tower or the sides. Anything that hit the deck shatters. Stuff that hits the conning tower hits. It's not at a great angle for torpedo bombers, but I'm going to continue to donate him some plane kills. Only about 20 points left, so I might get this hit off, I might not. Torpedoes travel fairly slowly. As a fighter tags me, need to get these past this, and then I can ditch what's left and the game does end. But, all in all, a fairly decent game. I was essentially not challenged throughout the course of the match, and I got to show off all the munitions, including the really crappy torpedo bombers. Nevertheless, even though they're really crappy, it doesn't mean you don't use them. As you can see, I did land 26 torpedo hits. So, overall performance-wise, just shy of 178,000. Besides the 26 torpedo hits, 19 bomb hits, 27 planes interdicted by hull, 8 incapacitations, 2 actual kills, 10 fires, 3 floods, 8 defended ribbons, 1 capture ribbon, solo capture, thank you very much, 23 spotting ribbons, 32 rocket hits, and 5 planes interdicted by interceptor. team score wise, I am top of the team at just shy of 3,000 base experience. So this was a fairly extended game that went down to the wire. So as you saw, I was able to accumulate quite a bit of damage farming. I did get threatened in my hull a little bit by the Lion for a brief bit, but other than that I was fairly immune, as most tier 10 carriers are. Damage distribution wise, you'll note that this game is surprising in that I did deal the majority of my damage using Torpedo Alpha, but that's more due to the sheer weight of torpedo hits than anything else. To put it into perspective, 26 torpedoes produced 73,000 damage per torpedo, so that's roughly just shy of about 3.5k per torpedo. If I did 26 torpedo hits in a Hakuryu, where the Torpedo Alpha is something like 8,500, I believe, somewhere in that range. After reduction, each torpedo does about 7,000. I would have done, what's that, 140,000? Probably just about 150,000 of just raw torpedo damage alone, which is basically almost all my damage if those were Hakuryu torpedoes. So I would have done double the damage with just one munition alone if these were Haku torpedoes, so that kind of just shows off how anemic the relative damage per torpedo on the Midway torpedo bombers is. Bombs 50,000, rockets 32,000. The Midway is a good mix of armaments usually, but typically bombs and rockets contribute the most amount of damage. Fires and floodings can contribute, but that varies pretty wildly game to game. It also depends on what you're hitting. As you saw, I used most of my reserves. I lost 90 aircraft, but let's discount the 7 fighters that I kind of suicided at the end. So I lost 83 aircraft over the course of the game, and at the end of the game, as you saw, I was kind of on the dregs of my reserves, but still able to inflict good damage overall by conserving damage where I can. Harugumo hits and some of the hits on the Alaska, showing off both the pros and cons of using the large ellipse on the HE dive bombers. Credit-wise, just in case you're wondering, this is with a perma-cam mode Midway, so if I wasn't running on premium time, which is the normal, I would be making just shy of 260,000 credits. Going back to ports, just to go over the armor schema and commander build. Just going to minimize this for posterity's sake. So just quickly skimming through the models. We got the standard upgrades in 1 and 2, the only aircraft upgrades, so that's Aircraft Groups Modification 1 and Aircraft Engines Modification 1. Follow this up with Torpedo Bombers Modification 1, as I've mentioned in many videos at this point. I like the extra 5 seconds, it lets you arm out nice and far, at even say 9 kilometers if you can be confident that you're going to be going perfectly straight, and get that nice perfect drop from outside of detection range and outside of AA range. In slot 4, I'm taking Bombers Modification 2. Your bombers are the largest squadron. They launch 12 planes at once, which means they get the most benefit of increased health from increasing percent HP, so I take Bombers Modification 1. Attack Aircraft Modification 1 is another tempting one, but putting HP onto already fragile attack aircraft seems to be less valuable to me. Then I take Flight Control Modification 1. This of course does leave you with a rather large concealment of 13.8 kilometers, but you're an armored aircraft carrier that does 33 knots. So it's usually not a problem. I like the extra restoration time and deck space. That does push you up to 20 dive bombers of deck space, which I enjoy immensely. And lastly, the general upgrade of plane health. Plane speed, of course, is another option if you wish, but I prefer plane health over plane speed. It produces a lot more tangible results, and the number is also quite a bit larger. Captain-wise, a very standard captain. I am using Ovechkin for the improved survivability expert just to eke out a little more out of the HP on aircraft per tier. But otherwise, this is my standard Midway and or American carrier captain. Since American carriers have HE dive bombs and HE rockets, I take demolition experts. So you take your core 9 skills, then you take your plane speed, then you take your another 1-pointer. Now at this point, you deviate from the other carriers where you might take another 1-pointer, another 1-pointer, preventive maintenance, that kind of thing. Since you launch fires, at that point you take demolition expert, and last but not least, you take Concealment Expert whenever you want with your 4 points. As your only 4-pointer, this is just to get your carrier hull down a little more so you can get slightly closer to the enemy. Now if you think Concealment Expert is a waste of your time, or you don't mind having something like 15-16 kilometer detection, you can take Sight Stabilization. It does marginally increase aiming speed. To put it into perspective, for dive bombers, 15% would probably decrease the aim time by 0.2 seconds to get to a perfect ellipse. It's up to you whether you think that is worth it. Personally, I find getting closer to be a lot more worth it than getting slightly better aim time, so I opt for Concealment Expert, but both options are viable. Going back to ship parameters, this is a fairly standard tier 10 carrier, but I will talk about armor, just because armor is actually very important on these high tier carriers. Now the Midway, as I mentioned, does have a uniform armored flight deck of 87mm. Remember when I mentioned the aircraft, the rockets only have 68mm of penetration, the dive bombers only have 67mm of penetration, and at 87, this means this entire deck area of the Midway is immune to HE dive bomb and rocket attacks. So instead, when you're shooting rockets, you have to try and get them to hit the sides or this unarmored conning tower slash island area, as I mentioned here. Now the Midway is also unevenly armored. On the side with the island, you have a 178mm belt. On the side without the island, you have a 193mm belt, but that's only really relevant when you're shooting at it with cruisers with AP. Battleships will almost always penetrate right through. But anyway, as a result of this 87mm deck, you're immune to Midway rockets, Audacious rockets, Hakuryu rockets, and also Midway dive bombers and Audacious level bombers. The Hakuryu is a similar story, also immune in this area, and so as a result you have to attack with torpedoes or hit the sides, but the Audacious is a little different. Since you might face an Audacious as a Midway, just remember the Audacious armor scheme looks like this. It has a central deck of 102mm, however outside of that it's 38mm, and at the fore and aft it's 25. So you can hit your rockets and bombs into here, or just a little further back here, but once you get to the conning tower, that's where the belt about starts, so you want to avoid putting any bombs into these sections. Of course, you could skim and hit the 38mm sections on the side if you're lucky, but rather than gamble, I would say instead your best bet is to hit the fore and aft ends with bombs or rockets. And yeah, that was a pretty good game to play and demonstrate the Midway. It's been a while, so just bringing an update back, finishing up the trio of tier 10s. And that will wrap up my Tier 10 Carrier re-review for patch 0.8.9. Hope you enjoyed it, and cheers to all.